What if the most important piece of ocean on the entire planet could be shut down by 3 tiny islands you have never heard of? And what if the United States just spent 1 week quietly taking that power away, piece by piece, while most of the world was looking somewhere else? Before we go any further, if you want to actually understand what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now, hit subscribe and tap that like button. Not for me, for you. Because this story keeps moving fast and you do not want to miss the next piece of it. And let's start with the ocean itself. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow strip of water separating Iran from Oman and the United Arab Emirates. At its tightest point, it is only about 33 kilometers wide. That is barely wider than a large city. And yet, according to shipping and energy analysts, roughly a fifth of the world's oil and gas moves through that single passage every single day. Tankers from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Iran itself all squeeze through the same narrow channel on their way to the rest of the world. Now, picture 3 small islands sitting almost directly on top of that channel. Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, and Abu Musa. Combined, these islands cover less than 10 square miles of land. You could walk across some of them in under an hour. On a map, they look like nothing. Just a few specks of rock and blue water. But location changes everything. Whoever controls these islands can watch, and in theory threaten, almost every ship that passes through the strait. Iran has held these islands since 1971. That year, Iranian forces moved in and took control of them just before the United Arab Emirates became an independent country. The UAE has disputed Iran's ownership ever since, raising the issue at international meetings for over 50 years. Iran has never given the islands back. Instead, reports say Iran spent decades slowly building them into heavily defended military positions, coastal radar, missile storage, launch points for small, fast attack boats, air defense systems designed to cover the entire strait. Iranian officials have reportedly described these islands as their own stationary, unsinkable aircraft carriers. Researchers who study the region, including academics in China who have written about Gulf security, have referred to this island chain as part of Iran's layered defense network, a kind of shield built specifically to make the strait difficult for any outside power to control without Iran's approval. It helps to picture the geography for a second. Greater Tunb reportedly sits roughly 30 miles off the Iranian coast and around 50 miles from the UAE, close to the path that loaded tankers use when entering the Persian Gulf. Abu Musa sits further along the approach, in a position to watch ships before they even reach the narrowest part of the strait. Lesser Tunb sits between the two. Put together, researchers describe them as forming a kind of overlapping net, where very few vessels can pass through without coming into range of at least one of these positions. That is a large part of why a handful of rocky outcrops, each smaller than most city parks, have mattered so much for so long. For years, these islands were treated as background information, a footnote in regional politics. That changed in the middle of July 2026. According to reporting from CNN, the Associated Press, and Gulf news outlets, the United States military carried out a series of strikes against Iranian military positions, including strikes on Greater Tunb and Abu Musa, as tensions in the region escalated sharply. One of these strikes reportedly lasted around 90 minutes and targeted what U.S. Central Command described as coastal defense systems and missile-related infrastructure on Greater Tunb. This is where the story gets so interesting, because the islands were only part of a much bigger picture. What officials and analysts have described publicly points to a coordinated campaign involving multiple branches of the U.S. military working across air, sea, and now, for the first time, unmanned systems on the water. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly how modern warfare in a place like the Strait of Hormuz actually works, and why this moment matters far beyond one region. To understand why the United States targeted these specific islands, you need to understand what Iran has reportedly used them for. This is not just about owning rocks in the water. It is about controlling a choke point that the entire global economy depends on. Iran's naval strategy in the Gulf has never been about matching the United States ship for ship. Iran does not have the kind of large navy that could fight the U.S. Navy directly and win. Instead, according to research from groups like the Congressional Research Service, Iran built what analysts often call a mosquito fleet, thousands of small, fast boats capable of speeds well over 40 knots, armed with machine guns, rockets, and in some cases anti-ship missiles. The idea behind this kind of force is simple, even if the execution is not. A single small boat cannot sink a modern warship or a giant oil tanker on its own. But a swarm of 20 or 30 small boats approaching from different directions at once creates a problem that is very hard to solve quickly. Analysts who study this tactic describe it as a way to overwhelm a target's ability to track and respond to every threat at the same time. And here is the part that matters most for global oil markets. Iran does not need to actually sink a tanker to change the picture for everyone. It only needs tanker owners and insurance companies to believe there is a real chance something could go wrong. If insurance premiums for ships transiting the strait rise high enough, some companies simply choose not to send their ships through at all. That alone can quietly squeeze the flow of oil through the strait, without a single ship going down. Iranian officials have said publicly, according to state media reports, that they have continued upgrading this fast boat fleet for years, with newer generations of boats reportedly reaching higher speeds than earlier versions. Some Western estimates suggest Iran still retains a significant portion of this fleet even after weeks of conflict, though these figures have not been independently confirmed and should be treated with caution. This approach is not new. Iran used similar small boat tactics during the tanker war of the 1980s, when both Iran and Iraq targeted commercial shipping in the Gulf to pressure each other economically. Many of the same geographic advantages applied back then too, the same hidden coves, the same short distances between islands and shipping lanes. Decades of experience operating in this exact environment is part of what makes the Mosquito fleet a persistent challenge, even for a much larger and more advanced military. It is not a new weapon Iran developed overnight. It is an old strategy that has simply been updated with faster boats and better missiles. This is the environment the islands support. Radar systems on Greater Tunb and Abu Musa reportedly help Iranian forces track ships approaching the strait. Missile systems based there extend the range at which Iran could, in theory, threaten vessels far from the Iranian coastline. Taking up this infrastructure does not eliminate the fast boat threat by itself, but it does weaken the eyes and the reach behind it. That brings us to what happened across several days in mid-July 2026. According to Central Command statements and reporting from multiple outlets, including CNN and the National, the United States carried out repeated waves of strikes against Iranian coastal and island targets. On July 13th, strikes reportedly hit locations including Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Kangan, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas, a major Iranian port city that sits directly on the strait. On July 15th, U.S. forces reportedly conducted a 90-minute strike specifically on Greater Tunb, described by officials as targeting coastal defense systems and missile-related infrastructure. Iranian state media reported hearing explosions on several islands during this period, including Cheshm and Hengam, along with activity near Bandar Abbas. None of these individual reports have been fully verified in detail, and as with any active conflict, information from both sides should be treated carefully. What can be said with more confidence is that multiple independent outlets reported a clear pattern, repeated strikes on Iranian coastal military infrastructure over several consecutive days, described by U.S. officials as an effort to reduce Iran's ability to threaten shipping through the strait. One detail stood out to analysts watching this closely. Earlier strikes in this conflict reportedly took place mostly at night. The July 15th strike on Greater Tunb reportedly began in daylight in the early morning hours. Analysts have suggested this kind of shift can carry its own message, signaling confidence and reduced concern about being detected or intercepted, though officials have not confirmed this interpretation directly. Quick pause here, because if you are finding this useful, this is the moment to do something about it. Tap that like button right now. It genuinely helps this kind of careful, sourced video reach more people than the rushed, dramatic version of this story. All right, let's keep going. Alongside the island strikes, something else was happening that may end up being just as significant for the future of naval warfare, even if it received less attention in daily headlines. Reports from outlets including CBS News and specialist defense publications describe an operation in mid-July near Bandar Abbas involving unmanned surface vessels, essentially small robotic boats capable of operating without a crew on board. According to these reports, a company called Saronic Technologies has developed a vessel known as the Corsair, and the U.S. Navy has reportedly placed large orders for these systems over the past 2 years. Central Command reportedly confirmed that vessels of this type were used in an operation near a maintenance facility associated with Iran's submarine fleet. Footage released alongside the announcement reportedly showed a vessel undergoing repair work before the video ended. It is important to be clear here that many specific details about this operation, including exactly how much autonomy these vessels had during the strike, have not been independently confirmed, and responsible reporting should treat these details as still developing. What is not in dispute is the broader trend. Unmanned vessels operating on the water's surface without a crew at risk have become a growing part of modern naval operations. Ukraine has used similar unmanned boats extensively against Russian naval assets in the Black Sea since 2022, reportedly forcing changes in how the Russian fleet operates in that region. Defense analysts have pointed to this as part of the reason the U.S. has invested heavily in comparable technology. If accurate, the use of this kind of vessel against a target near Bandar Abbas would represent one of the first times these systems have been used in this kind of direct operation by the United States. That is a meaningful moment, regardless of the exact details still being confirmed, because it points to how future conflicts near coastlines and choke points may increasingly involve machines operating without a crew, alongside traditional aircraft and ships. Think about what that shift actually means in practical terms. A vessel like this can reportedly travel very long distances without needing a crew on board, which means no sailors are placed at risk during the approach to a defended target. It also means a military can send multiple vessels toward the same objective at once, so that even if one is stopped, the mission can still succeed. Other countries are watching this closely too. Ukraine's experience using unmanned boats against a much larger opposing navy has already shown that this kind of technology can shift the balance in a coastal conflict, even without matching an opponent's traditional fleet size. If similar tools become a standard part of how the United States and other militaries operate near contested waters, it could change how naval power is measured in the years ahead. Less about the number of large warships a country has, and more about how effectively it can deploy smaller unmanned systems at scale. Now, here is something worth pausing on for a moment, because it says a lot about how this story should actually be covered. A story like this one moves fast, and plenty of channels will fill in the blanks with guesses dressed up as facts. This breakdown is not going to do that. Where something is confirmed by multiple credible outlets, that gets stated clearly. Where something is still developing, or based on a single source, that gets flagged too, because that distinction matters more than ever in a fast-moving conflict like this one. Alongside the strikes and the unmanned vessel operation, reporting also points to a shift in the kinds of aircraft being used over the Gulf. According to Gulf News and other outlets citing defense officials, aircraft such as the A-10, an older aircraft originally designed for close support missions at low altitude, have reportedly been used in the region to help identify and respond to small, fast boats operating near the strait. Attack helicopters have also reportedly been used in a similar role, helping track and respond to small vessel activity and drone threats over open water. The reasoning behind using older, low, and slow aircraft like this in a modern high-tech conflict actually makes sense once you think it through. Small, fast boats moving at high speed near the surface of the water are difficult for high-altitude aircraft or long-range systems to identify clearly, especially when trying to tell a fishing boat apart from a military vessel. Aircraft that can fly low and slow, and that were built to survive sustained fire at close range, are reportedly well suited to this kind of mission, even decades after they were first introduced. There is something almost counterintuitive about this part of the story. A lot of people picture modern warfare as something driven entirely by satellites, drones, and long-range precision weapons fired from far away. But when the target is a small boat weaving through shallow water near the coastline, some of the most useful tools turn out to be aircraft built decades ago for a completely different kind of fight, flown low enough that a pilot can actually see what they are looking at with their own eyes. It is a reminder that even in a conflict shaped by unmanned vessels and advanced radar, human judgment at close range still plays a real role. Separately, officials have confirmed that the United States reimposed restrictions on ships attempting to reach certain Iranian ports through the strait. According to reporting from the National and other outlets, at least one tanker attempting to reach an Iranian port was reportedly targeted and disabled after allegedly ignoring warnings. Though the full details of that specific incident, including exact confirmation of casualties or damage, have not been independently verified by multiple sources, and should be treated with appropriate caution. Taken together, these reports describe a campaign involving strikes on island and coastal military infrastructure, the reported first operational use of unmanned surface vessels in this kind of direct role, and enforcement actions aimed at limiting shipping traffic tied to Iran. Whether or not every individual detail proves accurate once more information becomes available, the overall pattern described by multiple credible outlets points to a significant and rapidly evolving military and economic campaign centered on this one narrow stretch of water. So what does all of this actually mean beyond the individual strikes and reports? Let's step back and look at the bigger picture, because that is really where the importance of this story lives. For decades, Iran's strategy around the Strait of Hormuz has relied on a simple idea that even a relatively modest military force can create outsized influence over one of the most important waterways on Earth simply by making that waterway feel unpredictable and risky. You do not need the largest navy in the world to affect global oil prices. You just need enough capability and enough demonstrated willingness to use it that shipping companies and insurers start recalculating their risk. That strategy has worked to varying degrees for a long time. It is part of why the islands, the fast boat fleet, and the coastal missile systems all matter so much. Not because any single piece of it could defeat the U.S. Navy in open battle, but because together they raise the cost and the uncertainty of operating in the strait high enough to matter economically. What the reported strikes in July 2026 appear to target, based on official statements, is precisely this network of capability: the radar that helps track ships, the missile systems that extend Iran's reach, the maintenance facilities that keep vessels like submarines operational, and the fast boats themselves. Degrading each piece individually may not eliminate the overall threat, but it does appear intended to reduce Iran's ability to coordinate and sustain pressure on shipping over time. It is a strategy built on patience and repetition rather than a single decisive battle, and understanding that single idea is the key to understanding almost everything else happening in this story right now. At the same time, it is worth being honest about the limits of what strikes from the air and sea can achieve here. Iran's coastline includes a large number of small islands, inlets, and hidden coves, terrain that has historically made it difficult to track and preemptively strike small boats before they are used. You cannot target a hidden position before you know a boat is there, and once a group of fast boats begins moving toward a target, the window to respond safely narrows quickly. This is part of why reports describe such a wide combination of tools being used together: aircraft, unmanned vessels, coastal strikes, and blockade enforcement, rather than relying on any single method. It is also worth remembering that Iran has continued to respond throughout this period. Iranian state media has reported retaliatory strikes against locations connected to U.S. military presence in the region, including reported activity near bases in countries such as Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan. As with claims from any side in an active conflict, these reports deserve the same careful, cautious treatment as claims made about American operations. Verifying the full scale and outcome of any single strike from either side often takes time, and initial reports can be incomplete or later revised. Here is one more thing worth sharing, because if you have made it this far, you clearly care about getting the real picture rather than a quick headline. If this kind of careful sourced breakdown is useful to you, consider sending it to just one person who has been trying to make sense of what is happening in the Gulf. A lot of coverage right now leans heavily on dramatic language without much context. A single share from someone who found this helpful goes a long way toward getting a calmer, clearer version of the story in front of more people. Beyond the military details, there is a very real economic story underneath all of this, and it is one that touches almost everyone watching, even people who have never thought twice about a strait most of us cannot point to on a map. Before this period of heightened conflict, roughly 110 ships reportedly transited the Strait of Hormuz on an average day, carrying oil, gas, and other goods to destinations across Asia, Europe, and beyond. Countries like Japan and South Korea rely heavily on oil that passes through this specific route. When the number of ships willing to make that trip drops, even temporarily, the effects ripple outward. Oil prices react quickly to uncertainty in this region, and reports indicate crude oil prices moved sharply during this period as the conflict escalated. Higher oil prices affect fuel costs, which affect shipping costs more broadly, which affect the price of imported goods, food, and fertilizer in countries far from the Persian Gulf. This is part of why a conflict centered on a thin strip of water between Iran and Oman can end up mattering to someone filling up their car on the other side of the world, or paying a grocery bill that quietly climbed a little higher than expected. It is worth remembering that none of this requires the strait to actually close completely to have an effect. Even a partial slowdown, a smaller number of ships willing to make the trip each day, or higher insurance costs that get passed along the supply chain can move prices noticeably. That is part of what makes this kind of standoff so different from a traditional battlefield conflict. The economic pressure does not wait for a clear military outcome. It builds in real time, based on how safe shipping companies and insurers believe the route currently is, which can shift day by day depending on the news coming out of the region. There is also a quieter kind of disruption that reports describe happening alongside the strikes, interference with GPS signals in the area, reportedly making it harder for ships to confirm their exact position while transiting the strait. Even when no strike occurs, this kind of interference can add real uncertainty and risk for commercial crews trying to navigate safely through an already tense environment. All of this feeds into the same underlying dynamic. Shipping companies and insurers do not need certainty that something bad will happen to change their behavior. They only need enough uncertainty. And right now, based on multiple independent reports, that uncertainty appears to be higher than it has been in years. So where does this leave things? As of the most recent reporting available, the situation remains active and continues to evolve day by day. Officials on both sides have made public statements, some confirmed by multiple sources, some still unverified, and the full picture will likely become clearer only with time as more information is independently confirmed by credible reporting. What does seem clear, based on the reporting available right now, is that the strategic value Iran has placed on these small islands for over 50 years is being directly and repeatedly tested. The radar systems, missile positions, and coastal infrastructure that Iranian officials once described as unsinkable and permanent are reportedly facing sustained pressure from multiple directions at once. From the air, from unmanned systems on the water, and from economic measures tied to shipping access. Whether this leads to a longer-term change in how the strait operates, or whether it becomes one more chapter in a decades-long standoff that eventually settles back into an uneasy balance, is something only time and continued, careful reporting will answer. History suggests these standoffs rarely resolve quickly and rarely resolve in a straight line. What is worth remembering is just how much can hinge on a stretch of ocean only 33 kilometers wide, and how 3 small islands, barely large enough to notice on a map, can end up shaping oil prices, shipping routes, and international tension far beyond their tiny size. If this breakdown helped you actually understand what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, rather than just reacting to another dramatic headline, that is exactly the kind of coverage this channel is built around. Hit like if you want more of this, subscribe if you want to stay updated as this story continues to develop, because based on everything reported so far, this is very unlikely to be the final chapter. And if you have questions about any part of this, especially the part still being confirmed, leave them in the comments. Some of the best follow-up videos on this channel have come directly from questions people asked, right there below. At the end of the day, this is a story about how a handful of small rocks in the water can carry the weight of the global economy on their shoulders, about how modern conflict increasingly plays out through radar stations, unmanned boats, and economic pressure as much as through traditional battle, and about why understanding the details carefully and honestly matters more than ever when the headlines move this fast. Most people watching this will never sail through the Strait of Hormuz in their lives. Most people will never see Greater Tunb or Abu Musa on a map again after today, and that is completely understandable. But almost everyone will feel some small ripple from what happens there, in the price of fuel, in the cost of shipping a package, in the small print of a fuel bill that goes up for reasons that never get fully explained on the evening news. That is the quiet power of a choke point like this one, and it is exactly why stories like this deserve careful attention instead of quick headlines. Stay with this channel, because we are going to keep tracking every confirmed development, one careful step at a time.